Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to welcome my guest, Brandon Kibbe with Great River Hydro, and everyone joining at MassCEC and beyond for the formal launch of our newly branded speaker series, Thoughtful Climate. Here each month, as we have for the last 5 or 6 months, we'll highlight experts, pioneers, and practitioners from a variety of existing and emerging climate tech sectors and disciplines, as well as subject matter experts who can provide insights into the broader economic, social, and technological dynamics shaping the climate tech industry. Today, we're talking about hydropower, the role it plays in our power system, how a changing climate, and in particular, shifting precipitation patterns are impacting our rivers and hydropower, the role of innovation in hydropower, challenges facing the sector, and more. So before I jump to Brandon, I'm going to just set the table briefly for our conversation today. Just to level set, in-state hydropower provides about 2% of the state's annual energy needs, about 300 megawatts of clean dispatchable capacity. About 1 million megawatt hours annually, provides grid balancing capabilities and skilled jobs in rural communities. It's worth noting that hydropower generates about 8% of the generating capacity across our entire region, that is across ISO New England. And so to put this in perspective, solar and wind combined represent about 7% of generating capacity across New England, hydro about 8%. So it's a very important part of our clean energy mix. And I also think the history here is really fascinating. I think many are unaware that hydro facilities across the state most of them were originally configured to drive mechanical systems to power the Industrial Revolution. The dams and canals of Holyoke and Lowell are great examples here. They powered mills in the city, converting the kinetic energy from the Connecticut and Merrimack rivers into mechanical energy, which drove the paper and textile mills in those cities. And by the late 1800s, some of those hydro assets in Holyoke in particular began producing electricity, but that conversion from mechanical energy to electricity was not completed until 1950. So really a fascinating history and a strong connection between hydropower and this state and this region's strength with regard to the Industrial Revolution. So let's dive in. A bit of housekeeping before we start for those listening in. As always, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to reserve some time near the end and do our best to address those. So welcome, Brandon. I really appreciate you joining me today. Why don't you start, if you could, by just introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about Great River Hydro. I know you own assets on the Connecticut and Deerfield rivers, if I'm correct. So, how many facilities and what's that total generating capacity look like? Just love to hear kind of a high level sketch of Great River Hydro and yourself.
Sure, great. And thank you very much to MassCEC and Galen for inviting us to join you today. We're excited about this conversation. Name's Brandon Kibbe. I'm Vice President of External Affairs with Great River Hydro. Actually started with the company under prior ownership in 2013. I've been working in a variety of different roles with the company, but doing external affairs for Great River Hydro in my current role. Great River Hydro is an owner-operator and independent power producer in the New England ISO market. We are actually the largest conventional hydropower generator in all of New England. And when I say conventional hydropower, I mean not pump storage. We have some pretty interesting facilities located on the Connecticut and Deerfield rivers in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts. On the Connecticut River, we have 6 generating stations and 2 storage-only reservoirs that reach from the very northern end of New Hampshire at the very headwaters of the Connecticut River at 2nd and 1st Connecticut Lakes, which are storage-only reservoirs, and then 6 generating stations located sequentially downstream, extending all the way almost to the Massachusetts line at our Vernon hydroelectric station. On the Deerfield River, we have 7 generating stations and 1 storage only reservoir that stretch again. Basically, it's just almost the same exact system in a much smaller scale. The Connecticut River, of course, is the New England's largest river, whereas the Deerfield is a small tributary to the Connecticut River. Those facilities stretch from basically the headwaters at our Somerset Reservoir at the base of Stratton Mountain and flow downstream almost to the confluence with the Connecticut River in Deerfield, Massachusetts, where our Shelburne, Deerfield and Shelburne, Massachusetts, where our Deerfield #2 station is located. Total
Great.
capacity of those facilities is about 589 megawatts. We generate about 1.6 million megawatt hours a year in renewable power, enough to power about 213,000 homes. There's a couple of things that make Great River Hydro's facilities unique in terms of hydro in New England. Number one is size. These are by far the largest facilities in New England. In fact, we own the 2 largest conventional facilities by an order of magnitude, which are our Moore and Comerford facilities, the 197 megawatts and 168 megawatts individually.
In northern Vermont,
In
those facilities,
northern New Hampshire and Vermont.
or
Yep.
New Hampshire.
We also have reservoir storage. When most people think of conventional hydropower, they think of run-of-river hydropower, and that's in fact what most conventional hydropower is in New England. We have something slightly different, which is we have reservoir storage located at every single one of our facilities. And the large reservoirs at the north end of each facility or at the upstream end of each system provides us with tremendous amount of base flow that we then use over and over and over again as that water flows downstream. So that sequential location of our facilities allows us to sort of optimize our use of water as it flows.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. And that I assume that those reservoirs are also what kind of give you that dispatchable
That's right.
capability.
That's right.
And
And where run-of-river is more of a base load sort of generator, where it just generates as the water flows to it and the water continues downstream. We store it in a reservoir, and then we're able to turn our units on and off when the grid needs our services the most. And so that dispatchability allows us to be flexible in how we operate within a single day, within a season, within a year. And it allows us to modify our operations as the system demand and changes evolve. And for instance, as more variable renewables have penetrated into the New England market, that has shifted the peaks a little bit further into the earlier morning and later afternoon, we are able to still meet those peaks and generate in those times because we have that flexibility that reservoir storage gives us.
yeah, no, thank you. That's very helpful. I think people hear that about hydropower, but that additional explanation, that clarification is really helpful. And I do want to kind of get into, I think, a fascinating piece about hydropower is this coordination across facilities, and forget within one owner, but across owners, right, on the same river. And it's not something I think I had really fully contemplated before having a conversation with you and Aaron, Great River CEO, a couple years ago. And so we'll get into that in a bit, but I do want to make sure we just maybe back up a bit. And what are the kind of core components of a hydro facility? There's obviously a turbine. There's in the case of many of your facilities, there's some kind of a structure, a dam holding back water. But what are the key components? How are these things actually generating electricity?
Well, and I'm really glad you touched on the history in the introduction there, because it's really important to remember that rivers and hydropower have long powered industry, not just in our region but globally, and it did it originally in a kinetic to mechanical fashion, as you described in the introduction. And when you think about even during colonial times, when colonists would build a dam to divert the power of water over a water wheel that would then turn a shaft that would then either maybe turn a grist mill or spin a sawmill. That technology is very old and has been used over and over and over again. And so, not surprisingly, when we discovered how to harness and commercialize energy in the electricity in the late 19th century, names that you might recognize like Edison and Tesla and Westinghouse, they started utilizing hydropower and converting, these old kinetic hydropower stations to, instead of turning a grist mill or turning a sawmill, they started turning a generator. And so they used this technology very early on in the commercialization of electricity. Not surprisingly, as a result, hydropower is the longest tenured generator on the system today. If you looked at the average age of hydropower, it's about 60 years old, a little bit more than 60 years old. Whereas you think a solar facility might last 20 to 25 years, a wind facility might last that long, conventional generators, fossil generators might last 30 or 40 years. We have hydropower stations on the Deerfield River in western Massachusetts that came online in 1912. So these are very long tenured facilities. Like you described, these all start with a dam, right? At its core, hydropower uses gravity to generate electricity. Water has a substantial mass, and when it falls due to the action of gravity, it generates substantial kinetic energy. So if you think about, you take a glass of water and you pour it on your hand, and it's very gentle. If you raise that glass of water up and you pour it down on your hand, it suddenly splashes all over the place. And what happens is as you increase the amount of force that gravity can act on that water, it generates more power. So
Increase the head.
Because of the head, and yes. the hydro speak there is head. We try to stay away from the jargon if we can, but
we could use some of the jargon on this.
Okay, sounds good.
So
we'll the translate. More head you can increase, the more height you can create, or behind the dam, the height of the reservoir below the river down below, the more power you can generate with the same volume of water. And so hydro tries to maximize that in order to generate the most power it can with whatever volume of water it receives. And so we have a dam, and that creates the elevation difference, and it can also store a significant amount of fuel, right, in the reservoir itself. Then there's an intake that connects the dam to the turbine generator. And that pipe, the intake and the pipe that connects it, and the hydro speak there is a penstock that connects the dam to the generator. And then at the bottom of the generator, you have the water wheel. Attached to the water wheel is a shaft. The top of the shaft is attached a rotor, and that's a classic spinning generator, which is, through an electromagnetic process, generates electricity that then gets transformed with various transformer and control equipment, and then gets delivered to the grid. And what's interesting is there's lots of different ways you can configure a hydro facility. And at Great River Hydro, we're blessed to have just about every type there is from a conventional hydropower plant. We have everything from a classic, just a dam and a station attached right to it, to a place where we have a dam and a station located 2.5 miles away, and the water gets delivered through a solid rock tunnel a great distance. We have canals and penstocks and all kinds of interesting configurations. It's amazing that the engineering feats that they were able to accomplish 100 plus years ago.
It is. Yeah, absolutely incredible. I saw some of the pictures when I visited Holyoke Gas and Electric's facility, I think last summer. I looked at some of their historical photos from the, kind of rebuilding the dam in the early 1900s, and the amount of effort and material put into those projects was absolutely incredible. I wonder if you could just briefly speak to what's the capacity factor like? Is there, I assume that varies dramatically based on a variety of factors, including, rainfall, but just on an annual basis, can you give us a sense relative to other renewables? And of course, this metric that describes, for those folks tuning in who aren't aware, that describes essentially the kind of percent of out of it, usually a period of time, usually a year, that a generation asset is actually producing energy.
So, and it varies widely in hydro between, when you talk about capacity factor, it really depends on where you're located in a watershed, the size of the watershed. So generically, I would qualify that as the hydrology of the system that you're operating in, the type of system you're operating. Is it run of river? Is it reservoir storage? So you do have a fair amount of variation in hydro. I can say for our fleet is about a 30% capacity factor, kind of across the board. Some are more, some are less. And when you think about how these were originally developed and how they are operated, you'll understand these were originally developed by New England Power in a vertically integrated utility. And so when deregulation happened in the late 90s and transmission and distribution remained regulated, but the generating side of the house was spun off into these independent power producers, generating in a competitive marketplace. The assets that we manage were, built and developed during a regulated time frame when the cost of those facilities could be passed on to ratepayers as part of a rate base. And so they were very much over-engineered in a lot of different ways. And so if you look at our largest facility, our Moore facility located near Littleton, New Hampshire, 197 megawatts in size. We have 5 units there. 4 of them are the large original ones. One is a new one that came online in 2023 that we added to increase efficiency. But those 4 original units are almost 40 megawatts apiece, or actually larger than 40 megawatts apiece. We have 4 of them that operate. We might operate all 4 of them all day long during a few days a year during the spring melt, when all the snow melts. Then the rest of the year, we might run 1 or 2 of those units for a few hours a day in order to utilize the peak capability in the peak hours. So, over the course of a year, that means we might only be operating at a 25% capacity factor.
Sure. No, that's helpful. That's good to understand. So why don't we just pivot to workforce? And because I just remember again running into some of your team members and thinking about how meaningful those jobs must be, particularly in some of the more sparsely populated parts of Massachusetts and New England. How many folks does Great River employ, and what degrees, what kind of background do they typically have?
Great. Well, first of all, we have an amazing team. Really lucky to work here and work with the people that we work with. Got a culture of, we're going to get it done, all hands on deck sort of place. And really, I think the tenure of our staff speaks for what it's like to work here. We have a lot of people actually who worked for New England Power that still work for us today. People who have 40 years of tenure. And I would say a vast majority of the folks that work here have over a decade of tenure. I started in 2013, and I still think of myself as one of the newer employees. So when people get a job here, they tend to stay. We have about 105 people on our current workforce. We're about equally divided between the 3 states where we operate: New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts. We about 50% union, 50% non-union. So we're IBEW union members, and our union members are mostly our operations and maintenance staff. These are highly skilled labor positions. You're dealing with folks that are operating in our operations and control center, the people that actually turn units on and off and open gates and close gates and control the water. We have electricians, technicians, mechanics, all of them very highly trained, very highly skilled, all members of the union. Our non-union staff, about half of our staff, fill a variety of technical and professional roles. We've got engineers, mechanical engineers, obviously, civil engineers, electrical engineers. We have environmental and safety professionals. Obviously, we're dealing with large mechanical equipment and on rivers. So there's lots of things to do. We have finance and accounting professionals, information technology professionals. Cybersecurity is a big thing that we in the power industry need to keep our eye on. Obviously, legal and business management and development type folks. So wide range of professionals that work for the company.
That's great. That's really helpful. You're probably aware of our internship program, so I know that folks are always looking for young people are always looking for opportunities in a variety of roles and a variety of sectors across the industry, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's interest out there in working for a significant hydro asset owner. I do want to talk a little bit about innovation. This is somewhat of a shameless plug for the Mass Clean Energy Center's Commonwealth Hydro program, which is a relatively small program, but it's one of our oldest programs. We've made over 7 million in awards over 16 years. So again, one of our longest standing programs to existing hydropower asset owners in Massachusetts. And those awards have been made to facility owners. And I believe Great River I'm almost certain that you guys have been awarded once or twice under the program to maintain or increase the capacity of existing hydro facilities. And to be clear, the program is not about, we're not providing awards to create or develop new hydro facilities. These are for existing hydro facilities that are operating under FERC licenses. So I'm wondering if you could speak to this, Brandon, not necessarily to the grants that we've provided to you, but beyond regular kind of annual maintenance, what type of investments is the company making in your facilities to improve efficiency or production?
Well, of course, I have to say thank you for the grants that MassCEC has provided us, and they are, the grant program is extremely helpful to hydro operators from the big guys like Great River Hydro down to the smallest of participants. We're members of the Bay State Hydropower Association, and I work on a regular basis with my friends who would consider themselves the mom and pop shop of the hydro industry, and it's a terrific program that you operate. We talked a little bit about some of this, but in terms of investment, there's a misconception, right, that hydro's been there, sort of bought and paid for, right? It's fully depreciated, and it's there. It doesn't need any more investment, right? But consider. This is massive infrastructure on the largest rivers in New England, out there and exposed to those wonderful seasons that we all know and love, and also contending firsthand with the climatic changes that we're experiencing in New England. So you require not just for major capital investment to maintain this large facility, but also to be resilient to the changes that we're enduring. That's number one. Number two, as we described earlier, these are antiques, right? Most of the major capital equipment that are located in these facilities have life expectancies of 20 to 40 years. As I mentioned earlier, many of our facilities are over a century old. The only way they get to that point is by continual reinvestment and life extension projects, and oftentimes complete replacement of existing systems. Yes, if you stand on the outside of our facilities and look at them, they look much like they did when they were developed a century ago. You go inside of these facilities, and to the untrained eye, it may look that way as well. But I can guarantee you, if you crack open some of these things and take a look inside, you'll see there's a lot of new steel, there's a lot of new copper, there's a lot of new concrete, there's a lot of everything that goes into keeping these things functioning for as long as they have. And then, of course, last of all is hydropower is federally licensed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. These licenses last 30 to 50 years. I'm jokingly saying when I say it, but it's serious when I say that, you know, we are currently relicensing our Wilder, Bellows Falls, and Vernon stations on the Connecticut River, and we are in the 13th year of a licensing process for existing facilities. That, you know, a 13-year process that was supposed to take 5.5 years. We've spent like $14 million on studies to support that licensing. And that licensing is going to require a whole bunch of new investment to adapt to the new operational constraints, the new environmental requirements that we will get for this new license. So every 30 to 50 years, we need to go through that process and make these additional investments just to make sure that these existing facilities are allowed to continue to operate.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. That's helpful, and I think it's a very good pivot to the federal environment. And we'll get into the environmental impacts in a bit, but particularly just, and I think this is important for every conversation as much as it can be sometimes a difficult conversation that I have on this show, and that is the impact of the Trump administration. And what are you seeing? Is the industry being impacted, whether it's via cuts or regulatory changes? Yeah, we'd just love to hear your take on how your facilities are being impacted, again, both from a kind of financial perspective and or regulatory perspective by the new administration in Washington.
Sure. I appreciate that. And you know, and sort of regardless of the industry, you know, business likes predictability. It likes to know what's coming. It likes, you know, you can't always see around corners, but you don't like getting the goalpost changed on you mid-game. That said, hydropower has long benefited from being supported on a bipartisan basis. You know, and maybe that's due to the fact that these things have been here for a very long time. And, you know, and were developed during a time, you know, during an industrial time when, you know, the culture of our country was very much, you know, the betterment of man and the development of natural resources for the better, you know, you think of it, it's just how we were culturally when these things were built, and they're just part of the landscape now and have been for a very long time. And maybe that explains why it's bipartisan. Maybe it's because these things are located in red states and blue states alike. And there are a lot.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, they're everywhere. And so we have been impacted to a degree. You know, it's still a little questionable about some of the hydropower grants that have traditionally been available, and some of them that have been, you know, almost really recently authorized under the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed a couple of years ago. So we're not entirely sure what's happening with some of those grant programs. However, you know, the recent budget reconciliation bill that goes by another name that I can't make myself say is some of the incentives that hydropower was able to take advantage of through the Inflation Reduction Act survived that process. And we still have access to those incentives, the tax incentives in particular around production tax credits and investment tax credits. So hydropower's bipartisan support actually helped win the day for our industry through that process. There's also a really important ruling that happened technically under the Biden administration at the very tail end with some IRS rules that came through that actually allows hydropower to finally take advantage of and have the same access to what they call the 80-20 rule for reinvestment in individual units of energy. So the way it used to be is, for like a wind facility, for instance, if you repowered a single turbine in a wind farm, that single turbine, if you repowered 80% of its fair market value as new, you're able to claim that as in that one unit as entirely new. Whereas hydropower, up until this recent IRS change, you had to do 80% of the total investment of the plant, including the dam and the station and all the
The
other
balance of
infrastructure.
system, if you
It
will.
was
Yeah.
impossible to access that
Hmm.
previously. This new rule allows us to have a single unit of energy. So if you think of our burn-in station, we actually have 10 units in our burn-in station. Most of our stations have multiple units. And so now if we repower a single unit, that single unit can be considered new if we repower 80% of its fair market value under this new rule. That rule has survived.
Understood.
And so, and what you're seeing across the hydro industry is a massive. It's really been a game changer, because repowering and life extension of it has been really difficult in a deregulated environment. And this incentive really has been meaningful, and it's really changing the game and allowing us to make the investments that are necessary so that we have this, these resources for another century.
And then thank you, that's very helpful. And what about with regard to tariffs? I mean, you mentioned some brands earlier, certainly some recognizable kind of powerhouses, literally and figuratively, Westinghouse and others. And I know we talked about this briefly when I visited your facility I believe it was in Monroe. But I'm kind of interested in the domestic supply chain for some of the core pieces of equipment. I also know that sometimes you need to source, from Europe and elsewhere, I suspect. And I'm just wondering and perhaps there simply hasn't been enough activity yet, given the relatively short passage of time since since the tariff regime has been in place. But is that impacting projects as well?
Well, I can say, our experience post-COVID was a step change, and it has been, consistent step change of probably about 20% across the board for
Mm,
materials and labor in all of our capital spending. So, we use a lot of copper, a lot of steel, a lot of concrete, but also a lot of labor, and the cost of all of those things has, before tariffs even came to be, there was a step change in that cost structure, starting right after COVID.
and that's certainly what you hear in the general construction industry. In fact, I think
Right.
the figure's higher. It's around
Yeah.
30%
Yep.
since COVID, right? For
Yep.
both
And
materials
and
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 labor.
and the tariffs are certainly going to have the same impact, and we're expecting it to have the same impact. So, in an industry, for us, our industry is saddled with a lot of fixed costs, and the capital expense, and in a wholesale electricity market where we exist, we are a price taker, right? In a wholesale electricity markets in New England are set by gas generators, natural gas generators. But it's a vast majority of the generation in New England, and so the price of gas is the driver of the price of electricity. And as a wholesale electric generator, we think of ourselves as a big deal in the hydro industry, but we're a small fish as a generator, and so we're just a price taker. So as energy markets have, if you look at the long-term trend in energy markets, wholesale electricity markets in New England, the energy price has declined over time. If you look at the long-term trend in capacity prices in the New England market, the long-term price has declined over time. And that's as it should be, right? The whole idea of deregulation in the late 1990s was to drive efficiency for the consumer. And the market has done that exceptionally well. But that means our revenue streams have shrunk over time, but our fixed costs have not. And in fact, as we were just discussing, the cost
Going in
increases
the
that
opposite
happen,
direction.
right? It's so it is a unique challenge, and one that we contend with on a daily basis.
Mm. So maybe one more hit. We'll hit innovation and from one more angle, then we'll pivot to some other topics. But with regard to innovation, we do see not many, but a handful of applicants to our competitive technology to market funding programs, and these are programs that we manage here at MassCEC that provide grants on a competitive basis to climate tech and clean energy innovators. We do see a handful focused on hydropower, usually around kind of new turbine designs. What do you see, Brandon, as the most kind of promising areas for innovation in the hydro industry, and what are your greatest pain points? I mean, it sounds like technologies that could reduce costs would be helpful, but yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective on kind of what you all look for as you think about innovation.
Sure. So, we've been deregulated now for 25 plus years, operating in a competitive marketplace. And so we've been squeezing efficiency out of these facilities for a very long time. And that goes, a wide ranging set of activities that have been engaged in, from automation to, operational models and other things so that we can optimize our dispatch, all kinds of interesting things that we've done. As we talked a little bit about some of the costs that are associated with relicensing, for instance, a major driver in cost in relicensing has to do with environmental performance, particularly around fish safety and fish passage. And when you think of the large fish ladders that get built around hydropower plants, a lot of those were installed on the Connecticut River around some of our facilities in the 1980s and 1990s for the passage of Atlantic salmon. They were trying to reintroduce Atlantic salmon into the Connecticut River. The Atlantic salmon restoration program ended up being a failure, and the federal government abandoned the program. But the fisheries biologists now are very interested in other species of fish, American eels, shad, other types of migratory fish that move from the ocean to the sea, or the ocean to the rivers to breed, one way or the other. And that means the facilities that we built for salmon don't necessarily work for those other species. And the investments that we made, several decades ago, either need to be completely modified or completely redone, or somehow changed. So fish safety and fish passage, constructing massive infrastructure like that, not only there's no revenue that's associated with that, right? If you invest in a new turbine that has better efficiency or capacity, that there's a return on that investment because there's a revenue associated. These environmental requirements, it's just an expense, and yes, it's an expense that allows you to continue to operate, but it's a massive capital expenditure that you have to outlay. And usually that type of thing also has an operational and maintenance impact as well. So if you think about if you were passing additional water through a fishway, that's water that's not powering a turbine. And so it's actually lost revenue operationally. If you think about if you have to increase what they call a rack spacing or decrease rack spacing to exclude fish from entering a turbine, that means there's less space for things to flow through, and they get clogged up a lot easier. And so you have to maintain that. You have to rake those racks in order to keep ice or leaves or other debris from buggering up the racks and keeping the water from flowing through the penstocks. So there's an operational expense to that as well. And so these are massive amounts of investments. If you can retrofit a turbine in a way that is safe for fish to just pass through the turbine and come out the other side unharmed, and that's really mostly for downstream passage. That could be a game changer. And there are a number of different technologies that are being explored around that, and they look promising. But and they look like they're getting most of the operational efficiency. You might actually lose a little bit of operational efficiency with the deployment of this new turbine, but you gain the fish safety piece that allows you to potentially avoid other investments that I said are just cost drivers.
Oh, that's fascinating. I did not anticipate that you would talk about kind of, entrainment and fish passage and as a potential area for innovation and progress and cost reduction. That's very interesting.
It is, but the problem, of course, with that is the way the system is set up today and the way the permitting is set up today. It's a prove it scenario. So you could install it, spend all the money that's required to install and upgrade your system, and then you have to study it to ensure that it performs the fish passage that it said it would perform, and prove it to the agencies before it is accepted as fish passage. The worst case scenario in that case, of course, is you make all those investments, it proves to be not as effective as the agency wants it to be, and you still have to do other mitigation measures.
It sounds like we need a hydropower fish passage innovation demonstration facility in the state of Massachusetts.
That would be amazing.
All right, we'll file that one away. That's interesting. So, and just reacting to something that you said earlier, so eels don't like ladders.
So the biology of this various organisms differs, right? So an eel tends to migrate on the bottom of the river,
right?
Whereas shad are surface migrators, and so how they enter a ladder is very different.
Sure.
But the other thing to remember is, there are still lots of eels in the Connecticut River. More than 100 years after some of these dams were built. How is that the case? And in fact, biologically, eels actually on a rainy night will migrate around a falls, a natural falls or a dam, over land. And they have that ability to do that. But the fisheries biologists want to see increased fish passage, and certainly fish passage benefits more than just the target species, right? There are other fish in the river. It allows for genetic mobility up and downstream. So there's good environmental reasons for why these things exist. But if there are more cost-effective and creative ways that we can achieve the same end through technological advances, then that would be really remarkable.
No, that's very helpful, Brandon. I think it's, we had, we were going to touch on the environmental and ecosystem impacts, and I'm kind of glad that we approached it from this angle. And maybe we can touch on it a bit more. But I think it is important to note for everyone that there's no perfect energy source with even within the clean energy and renewable energy realm. Every energy source has impacts, and it's about what we all do collectively to mitigate those impacts. I think you can see the real efforts that hydro facility owners have taken to do that here and around the country. But again, always room for improvement. And I think it's, again, fascinating that you've focused on this as an opportunity for innovation. Well, unless there's anything else you want to say about that, maybe we could pivot to, Brandon, to the impacts of climate change. I'm also just noting the time, and I want to make sure we get to a few questions, and I do have a couple more topics I want to hit on. But This is also it's hard to ignore this topic. One of the biggest impacts we're seeing, perhaps only second only to extreme heat events here in the Northeast, is dramatic changes in precipitation patterns. And of course, when you think about that, extended periods of drought, feel like we're in one right now, but punctuated by these, fairly extreme rain events. That's got to impact clearly rivers and hydropower. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about how you are all managing this our new climate and the change in rainfall.
Well, I think first of all, and again, I hate to keep going back to the fact that our system is maybe a little unique compared to other hydro in the region, but with the reservoir storage that we have, that provides us some degree of resiliency that other systems maybe don't have the benefit of. So when you think about large rain events, what it means is, we have these large reservoirs that are in sequentially located systems. And so we can, if we know an event is coming, if you think of, Tropical Storm Irene from, it's now 2011, when that came through, but other storms like that, where we know it's coming and it's going to deliver a charge of rain, we're able to draw our reservoirs down in advance of that rain arriving so that we can actually shut off the spigot and capture the rain when it comes and control what's happening downstream. It's a nice nature of having the dispatchability and reservoir storage that we have, is we can mitigate the flood impacts that happen during those events. In 2023, 2024, both happened on July 10th for some reason. There were massive, massive rain events that happened in northern New England in the area of the Connecticut River. There were stories of how Montpelier was basically taken out by floodwaters from the Winooski River. And number of communities adjoining the Connecticut River Valley that suffered on a tributary suffered tremendous amounts of damage from those really intense rains that happened in a 24 to 48-hour period. The main stem of the Connecticut River really didn't see a whole lot of flooding as a result of that. Nobody mentioned the fact that it was because we were capturing the rain and managing the water flows as they go downstream, but the main stem of the Connecticut River largely avoided because of our ability to operate. During those types of events, yes, we're a hydropower company, but we're all about dam safety, public safety, the preservation of life and property. And so we stand up an emergency operations control center internally, and it's all about managing water. We're no longer worried about making megawatts. We're worried about managing water. And I think I'd say we do it better than just about anybody. And we have an amazing team that does this. But the reservoirs really help. And in a drought like we're currently dealing with, particularly in northern New England, it's the worst drought that's on record in Vermont and New Hampshire right now. If you go to some of the tributaries to the Connecticut River, if you go to the White River on near White River Junction and sort of central Vermont is one of the largest undammed rivers in New England. You can walk across it with barely getting your ankles wet right now. And if the Connecticut River did not have large reservoirs that we've been drawing upon throughout this drought, it would look very much the same. However, if you go there today, it looks very much as it does any other time of year. Our largest reservoir in the system is drawn way down, but that reservoir storage has helped augment the flows in the river over the course of the year. So, your average recreational user on the lower Connecticut River wouldn't notice there was much less water than normal. Because it's been augmented by that reservoir storage. So that system, we do, hydropower does, or at least our type of hydropower provides some resiliency in the system. What is different, and I think what sort of the challenge we face with is the control structures on our dams, are designed for 100 years ago, before there were certain environmental constraints and other things. And so we have flashboards on some dams that when you trip the flashboards to allow large flows of water to go through, you have to wait for the flows to get down to the crest of the dam before you rebuild those flashboards. Well, that might expose upstream areas like certain types of habitat areas, or during certain times of the year, maybe there's fish that have laid eggs in the shallows. And if you have to draw the water down in order to rebuild the flashboards, you run the risk of exposing those to the sun and drying them up and having some impact. And so ideally we would be able to modify some of those systems in order to have more active control rather than the sort of passive control of flashboards. And so installation of more gates and have more ability to control the flow of water through those facilities would give us additional resiliency.
That's really helpful, Brandon. I suspect that a lot of people didn't have these insights into the extent to which hydro facilities play such an active role in, on the one hand, sometimes are criticized for impact on rivers, but what I'm also hearing is from you the very active management, particularly in an increasingly chaotic hydrological environment. So that's helpful to understand.
During those events, we work very closely with the Weather Service runs the Northeast River Forecast Center. We coordinate very closely with them to make sure that they get their forecasts accurate, and that helps public safety officials and all those types of people that rely on that flood information to have the best information they can. We coordinate very closely with the Army Corps of Engineers and state engineers that operate flood control structures that are on tributaries to our systems. We also coordinate closely with other hydro operators in the system, during events like that, to ensure that everybody has the data they need to manage the water they're receiving or are dealing with, so that it's highly coordinated across not just companies but also agencies to ensure public safety in those situations. But you're right, that's entirely behind the scenes, and the average person in the public has no idea about it. You go to parts of the Connecticut River where people have docks and pontoon boats, and you would never be able to have that, especially this time of year. Right now, in the drought that we're in, I mean, those docks would be sitting on mud flats if these dams and reservoirs weren't there. But those people are able to go out and still enjoy the recreation on the river as a result.
Yeah, no, and I've seen both. I've seen the Connecticut, the Deerfield, and the White Rivers actually all in the last couple weeks, just because of personal travel, and it's exactly as you report. I couldn't believe the White River. I've never seen it so low. I've never seen the Pemigewasset so low. It's just shocking how little water is flowing right now in those rivers. But the Connecticut looks quite good.
Like it always does.
Yeah, it does. There is just if we could touch on it briefly, because I know we're a little short on time now, but there is one fun aspect to this, which I remember having a conversation with the owner of Zor Outdoors, the rafting company in Charlemont, about, well, we coordinate with hydro facility owners on water releases. So there are also recreational uses, right? You've got rafting. So is there some coordination with those recreational users that you're essentially creating, or you're enhancing kind of whitewater conditions from time to time?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And so, when you think about it, like I said, we're licensed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We're using a public resource, a river. These are the waters of the United States. These are yours and mine. And we're using it for private enterprise. And so, we have a number of different public benefits that we provide, and we like to think millions of megawatt hours of renewable energy is a pretty important public benefit. But we also, as part of that is we provide recreation to the waters in the areas that we control. So we have dozens of boat ramps, picnic areas, trails. On our Harriman Reservoir, we work with a local sailing club, and they operate a mooring field on Harriman Reservoir for sailboats. We have a recreational use agreements with snowmobile organizations and the Catamount Trail Association. We are in Massachusetts. We are the largest private host of the Meek and Mohawk Trail across our properties. It's a substantial network of public recreation that we provide. On the Deerfield River, certainly the whitewater releases are one of those recreational opportunities. And so we closely coordinate with a whole host of Zor Outdoor, among other private operators, as well as folks like American Whitewater and some paddler groups, paddler associations for folks that are just sort of individual kayakers. We coordinate with them and with other hydro owners on the Deerfield River to provide whitewater releases. So if you've ever gone rafting on the Deerfield River in Western Mass, that was either below one of our dams or below probably the Brookfield facilities at Fife Brook.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's really helpful. I think that's kind of a fun and interesting aspect of hydropower. So I'm just pivoting here. I know we only have a few minutes left, but pivoting to some of the questions. One I think will be fairly easy to answer. You already essentially have energy storage built into your facilities in the form of these reservoirs. But would there be any reason why you might consider pairing battery energy storage with any of your facilities?
We're doing more than just considering it. We're actually actively pursuing some projects at some of our facilities. We talked about the capacity factor of our facilities. It's also important to remember is that the entire transmission system in Western and Northern New England was originally built to service our facilities specifically. New England Power built this as a regulated utility and built the transmission lines to connect these facilities and became the basis and the backbone of the grid that it exists now in Northern New England.
Oh, I was not aware of that. That's fascinating.
And so we have access to interconnection, maybe unlike many other entities. It's literally in our dooryard. And we have existing points of interconnection that we can leverage. And the other thing to remember too is
with substantial capacity in many of those.
Substantial capacity. Yeah. And because we have a low capacity factor, we have existing step-up transformers and existing point of interconnection that we have the ability to potentially pair. It matches better with solar than it matches with battery storage because you dispatch hydro in much the same way you would dispatch battery energy storage. You're looking to dispatch it in the peak times on the grid, and so in some ways, those two resources would be competing for the same amount of capacity on an existing point of interconnection. Whereas if you're utilizing an existing point of interconnection to marry some solar development, create a solar and hydro basically hybrid system where the hydro is the peaker and the solar is filling the middle part of the day. Really interesting and really able to leverage those existing points of interconnection in the existing system.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. We're certainly seeing interest in, energy storage developers looking at either downscaled or retiring fossil fuel facilities, I think for the same reason, right? You've got the interconnection, the headroom, the interconnection capacity. So it absolutely makes sense. And in many of these facilities, you have the available land to drop a system there and take advantage of that. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, it's the noon hour. We've reached that point. There were a few more questions, but I think we actually addressed a lot of that content and those additional questions earlier. So I just want to thank you, Brandon. This has been fascinating. It's been really fun to dig deeper into hydro. Really enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to visiting more of your facilities and just really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, Galen. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. And anytime you want to see another facility, just give us a ring. Happy to do it.
Great. And thanks to everyone who tuned in today. Look forward to our next conversation, which will be actually on Halloween, October 31st, focused on mass timber. That'll be a fun conversation as well. So thanks again, all. Take care, Brandon. Good to talk.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.